Good morning, everyone, and I hope every one of you are well and doing pretty good. And thank you again for joining in today's session, wherein we are going to discuss about the contracting complexities in healthcare and life sciences. What do you need to look at this year and coming years? So today, healthcare as an industry is been seen the highest investment we spend, and also it leads to increase in the medical debt and the fraud. So it is no surprise that we are seeing an increase in the regulations and reform initiatives globally. So before we deep dive into the session, I would just like to cover the basic housekeeping items for today's webinar. So we are recording the session. You might have seen a dialog box from Zoom webinar that the session has been recorded. The webinar duration is for 45 minutes, and we can go beyond to 60 minutes, but we'll be stopping after that. We will be keeping this webinar interactive. There will be a couple of polls, and also while we are presenting during the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box in your Zoom webinar. And also don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and the other social channels. And yeah, let's start today's session. So I'd just like to quickly introduce Sunil and Russell. So Sunil heads the product initiatives at Heavily, and he brings in 20 plus years of experience in the HLA's domain and also the digital transformation. We also have Russell, who helps a lot of our customers with the business transformation and how they can simplify their challenges across resource to pay, including contracting, invoice automation, and RFX management. So Sunil, I think let's start today's session, and I'll just hand it over to you. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hi, everyone. The webinar is focused around change. And clearly, this industry, our healthcare and life sciences industry, has been impacted by a lot of change that has occurred in the past couple of years, supply chain disruption, regulatory reform, ongoing regulatory changes, unemployment, the great resignation, and so on. So and all of these changes, obviously, they impact the way we transact, the way we conduct business. And we'll get into those complexities in a minute. But before that, let's actually, Maddie, you mentioned polls. So let's actually run a poll and ask the audience, which change is impacting your contracts the most today? Is it supply chain disruption, ongoing regulatory changes, provider and workforce movement, or virtual collaboration and remote care? Of course, there are many other changes that have happened in the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic kicked in. But for the purposes of this fun poll, we'll be limited the options to these four. So while we give the audience a minute to respond, Russell, what do you think? How do you think the audience is going to vote?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a pretty even distribution. Every industry has been struggling with the rapid decentralization of the workforce, right? That really touches on workforce movement and virtual collaboration and remote care, right? We were all sent home from the office 2 years ago, and many of us, myself included, have not made it back yet. However, I mean, the supply chain disruption, especially in the past year, I mean, we're hearing about huge boats full of goods at ports across the world that cannot get in and cannot get distributed across, to the economy, really. So there's a lot here. Every industry, though, not just healthcare, is struggling with the remote world. And specifically with healthcare, the regulatory changes are always bearing down. I'm interested to see. Oh, looks like we've got some results. What do you think, Sunil?
Yeah, this is interesting. I was hoping to get surprised, and to some extent, I am. This is nice, and again, I mean, this is such a broad and deep industry, and depending on the audience, I mean, clearly, they've voted according to what's really important to them. But like you mentioned, clearly, supply chain disruption looks like that's the biggest change out there, which has impacted agreements the most, huh?
Yeah, it's the major topic du jour, I think, is safe to say.
Yep, yep. Okay, so let's dive deeper into agreements, especially for this industry, and let's talk about what makes healthcare and life sciences contract management complex. So across the entire value chain, I mean, there are agreements that exist. I mean, this pretty much all business, all purchasing in this industry happens via agreements, whether it's purchasing of pharmaceutical drugs or medical device, medical supplies and equipment, or provider services. Everything is governed by agreements. And these agreements across the entire value chain, they have inbuilt complexity. Clearly, we all know about process complexities, taking an agreement, authoring an agreement, taking it all the way from the request stage to through execution. We all know about that. We know about some of the challenges that exist in this process, but in the healthcare and life sciences industry, there are many industry specific nuances that creep in around processes. For example, managing fair market value of goods and drugs and services, validating against those fair market value benchmarks, managing affiliations that exist in the industry and managing them on an agreement. There are complexities around managing information like fee schedules, complex information like fee schedules, tiered pricing, rebates that may exist across the board. Clearly this is such a highly regulated industry. There are complexities as it relates to laws and provisions across HIPAA, the Sunshine Act, anti-bribery, anti-corruption laws, and so on. And then, agreements, they don't exist in a vacuum. They are, agreements are often the single source of truth in organizations, and systems and processes across the board depend on data that exists in those agreements. So managing, all the industry specific processes, information in the form of rich metadata, managing against regulatory requirements, and complexities and dependencies across processes and systems can be pretty challenging and riddled with deep nuances.
Yeah, and on that point, Sunil, we're talking a lot about the specific intricacies of the healthcare industry. It's important to call out these challenges exist in every industry, right? Healthcare particularly might be feeling certain burdens around, regulatory requirements, it being such a highly regulated industry, and of course, specific nuances with how agreements work. There's a lot of GPOs, a lot of multi-participant agreements in the healthcare industry, but every industry has these problems, having the management of the metadata in your contracts and how that metadata can feed external systems of record in the organization to really drive consistency of the data between platforms. And that is really the secret sauce to taking contract management and contract data and turning that into a real powerhouse value add tool for any organization in any industry.
Yep, I absolutely agree, Russell. So well put. Um, we'll move on and talk and dive deeper into one key aspect of agreement management, which is management of obligations. And obligations themselves, I mean, all agreements contain obligations across all the contracted parties. And those obligations themselves have inherent intrinsic complexities. Obligations could be of a variety of types. SLAs, performance metrics, submission and regulatory reporting requirements. These obligations could be one-time obligations or recurring obligations spread across not only built into the agreement, but spread across documents like even onboarding and training documents and references to external laws and regulations. Obligations almost always contain embedded metadata like incentives and penalties for non-compliance, volume and revenue, commitment obligation, purchase commitment conditions, and so on. And of course, obligations pretty much, yes, legal and the department requesting agreement or owning the agreement. Yes, they're responsible for putting the agreement together, but obligation fulfillment, boy, that's handled, across the board, across all departments in an organization.
Yeah, that's another great point. And I mean, so often in the contract management world, we see a high degree of focus on the pre-signature processing of agreements. But I think everybody would agree that the value of a contract is achieved and the compliance with the contract is executed after the contract is signed. So much of the friction in an agreement occurs during the negotiation process when you're trying to round up all the stakeholders and redline the terms. And, as we all know, these can be very elongated, sometimes brutal processes. So that tends to steal the spotlight when you're thinking about what a contract management system might be able to bring to your organization from a value perspective. But we reckon you ought to really focus on the post-signature just as heavily, if not more heavily, than the pre-signature processes. What are you obliged to do? What are you on the hook for? How are you going to create standard operating procedures and policies to ensure that you are going to maintain compliance with your agreements? And we've talked a lot about some of the complexities of agreements. There's got to be additional complexities, right, Sunil, related to the process and also these dependent systems, right, which keeps
Yeah.
coming up in our conversation already, right?
Yep, absolutely, Russell. Thank you for the additional detail and importance of managing obligations that you touched upon. Clearly, there are additional complexities. I mean, it is it is hard to identify obligations first of all in the first place, then assign those obligations out to various teams to go and fulfill. There are complexities involved with tracking of those obligations, and most importantly, I think the toughest job anyone managing obligations has is to detect risk and do something before before an obligation can seriously negatively impact you, either on the revenue side or can impact you on the regulatory non-compliance front. You'll see here, I also called out actionable and non-actionable obligations. A lot of obligations, when you first look at them, the reality is there are no non-actionable obligations, but they may appear to be non-actionable initially, and they become actionable at a later stage in time. For example, should a breach occur, then the business associate is supposed to provide a report, of the security breach of PHI within a certain time frame, or upon receipt of goods, then a quality inspection or a complaint may be raised within a certain time frame. Those types of obligations, they are not very apparent, actionable when you first look at the agreement, but they become actionable at a later stage. So how does one manage those types of complexities? You're right. There's a lot to talk about, but let's move on. So now if you think about all the complexities and handling all of those complexities across thousands of contracts and obligations, handling contracts across global teams, and like we talked about, connected or rather existing disconnected and inflexible processes and systems. Uh, can lead to a lot of frustration, can lead to these challenges, the complexity challenges, and then process challenges that organizations experience can lead to inefficiency, can lead to revenue impact, i.e., spend leakage or prevention of revenue maximization, exposes organizations to risk and deteriorates relationships with vendors and with customers.
Yeah,
So yeah,
there.
there's
Yep.
sorry, go
Go.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just going to say, why don't we take this a layer deeper, right? Because we're talking about inefficiencies and risk exposure, et cetera. But let's relate this back to the core mission for healthcare institutions. How does this really impact the accessibility and the affordability and the quality of healthcare, right? I mean, that's what
It
we're after here in the healthcare and life science industry. Let's talk a little bit further about how these bottom line impacts really deteriorate the mission.
No, absolutely. You nailed it, Russell. These challenges and complexities, they absolutely impact what healthcare and life sciences organizations are looking to do. They're looking to improve healthcare outcomes. But then, handling, let's take an example. So with disconnected systems, information, if it doesn't flow smoothly into membership, into eligibility, into claims management systems, and so on. These are the systems that are actually serving providers, serving members and patients directly. So inaccuracies, if they creep into those systems, then that clearly will impact the quality of care that is provided. In addition, imagine all the time it takes to deal with all of the process inefficiencies and the complexities that we talked about. Organizations, healthcare organizations could be spending all of that time in actually focusing on delivering that quality of care. But obviously, all of these bottlenecks are likely preventing them from achieving those healthcare outcomes. So yeah, thank you for asking me that question and pointing out that we're talking to an audience focused on this industry. And we talked about contract management challenges. So let's look at obligation management as well. Russell, you've already covered some of the key call outs that appear here on the screen. Clearly, organizations they recognize the importance of managing post-award obligations, performance obligations, purchase obligations, and so on. But they pretty much all of them, clearly studies have shown that pretty much all of them indicate that it's hard to find those agreements. It's difficult to identify those obligations and then manage each of those obligations through their life cycle. And clearly there is a business case for not only for contract management like we talked about, but for managing obligations as well. because guess what, 70% of the value erosion occurs post contract award. And with that, why don't we actually take another poll and ask our audience, how would you grade your company's discipline around managing contractual obligations? What do you think your maturity level is currently? Is there little to no discipline, no formal processes for managing contractual obligations? You do have processes, but they're largely manual and tracked in Word or Excel. There is some sophistication, or you feel you are pretty adept at managing contractual obligations. Russell, I'll put you on the spot once again and ask you, how do you think the audience is going to vote?
Well, I would hope that everybody feels that they're adept. My experience is that it's probably going to be little to no discipline, or maybe sometimes manual processes. I mean, just think about the concept of an obligation in a contract. How do we even get our arms around that? How do we quantify this? Where do you go today to look at all the things that you're on the hook for across the entire, breadth of all of the contracts that you have in place? I know that this is a gap in the CLM, the contract lifecycle management industry, that is largely unaddressed by many organizations. I also know that this is a blossoming topic, something that's becoming more and more relevant. And I think a lot of it has to do with COVID, right? The current circumstances we've all been enduring for 2 years now has really catapulted this discussion forward in a lot of executive leadership roundtables, right? How do we know what's in our contracts? How do we know where we're exposed to risks? How do we know what we're on the hook for, especially as you're staring down the face of dramatic changes in the economy, or with regulatory circumstances, or in this case of COVID, some completely unpredictable circumstance that everybody has to deal with. So, if I had to predict, I would say there's some sophistication, or little
yes. Yeah, I was hoping folks would say there is some sophistication. I mean, I'm glad to see that folks are moving beyond, the manual tracking of obligations. We showed, through some of the studies that were conducted. I mean, organizations, they do realize the importance of managing obligations. So I'm glad to see that there is some sophistication, but clearly, this can still be taken to the next level as well.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the majority of people selected some sophistication, and in second place was manual processes. And I'd be interested to see what the data said 2 or 3 years ago. I imagine this is a trend that's moving in the right direction, maybe for not the greatest of reasons, but my guess is this is a new undertaking for a lot of organizations.
Yep. I would totally agree with you. Okay, so we talked about agreement complexities, we talked about obligation management complexities, and we talked about challenges with managing agreements, the business case for agreements, and for managing for the business case for contract and obligation management. Now, as if all of those challenges and complexities were not enough, now more than ever, we have all of these external factors as well that are impacting the way we look at agreements and manage agreements. We've talked about many influencing external factors. We've talked about supply chain disruption there. We've talked about diversion of providers to pandemic care, holds on non-urgent care and elective surgeries. There is clearly a rise in virtual collaboration, remote caregiving, and of course, regulatory changes, they keep continuing year after year. New regulations keep kicking in. And all of these external factors, they impact agreements. And everyone responsible for managing agreements, They're looking to be more agile. They're looking to see how can they intelligently find agreements that may have, and obligations that may have been impacted because of supply chain disruption. How can they find those force measure agreements very rapidly, and then do something about it? They're looking to see, because for example, providers have had to expand their scope of services to cover pandemic care because of suspension of different types of surgeries and urgent, non-urgent care. Agreements have had to be rapidly generated and amended. That's what, beyond all of the complexities and challenges we talked about. Now the industry is being faced with these agility demands as well. How can they reinstate these suspended agreements as we get back to the new normal? And how can I do all of this without system downtime? How can I set up new agreement templates rapidly to cover pandemic care? Or, how can I set up a brand new approval workflow on the fly because I just lost a whole department due to the great resignation? So now that's what contract managers, that's what legal teams are looking for, i.e., are there solutions out there that can go beyond helping me with managing the core authoring, clause library standardization, agreement, end-to-end agreement lifecycle? Are there solutions out there that go even beyond that, and can help me manage to all the change that's happening and will happen in the future as well? That's what folks are demanding. And with that, Russell, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the solution that Avenir has to offer.
Thanks, Sunil. And yeah, the Avenir solution is built on the core principle that workflows and agility need to be fundamental core tenets of the application for it to work effectively. Right? Change is frequent, change is constant, change is to be expected, and you need your enterprise systems to be able to be leveraged to help drive and manage that change, to be, as the theme of the discussion, right, to be agile in the face of ever-changing circumstances, be they regulatory, be they any other circumstances as well. And what we've developed here at Avenir is an end-to-end solution to manage, of course, to manage the administrative challenges that come along with contract management. Because while we've been spending so much time talking about the post-signature obligation management, getting to the signature is not necessarily a cakewalk either. So we have to have a solution that can be leveraged by the people in the organization to efficiently drive the administration of agreements. And that solution also needs to help us manage the data in the contract and help us understand, again, what we are obliged to do based on all of these agreements. And that's really the vision for contract flow. We've built this application, this platform, you can say, on the ServiceNow platform. The reason for that is because ServiceNow is the global leader in enterprise workflow solutions. It's really the ideal platform to help enable the distributed workforce, to help drive efficient business processes and help deliver work to workers in an efficient and consistent manner, as everybody is undergoing all of these same challenges when it comes to all of the changes that we're embarking on together. And with that, we've got obligation management as well. Now, and this is the last box on the screen here, all about managing and ensuring compliance across your entire portfolio of contracts and agreements. And these solutions are designed to work together. Our obligation management solution can stand alone. So if you have a contract management application today, we can take those signed, executed agreements and run them through our models and extract all of the extract all of the obligations in the agreements using AI. We call that obligation discovery. It's a cumbersome process identifying what you're on the hook for, again, inside of these agreements. It's designed to work seamlessly with any CLM application or seamlessly with our CLM application, which is again designed to deliver all of those efficiency gains, all of those risk mitigation procedures that you would come to expect out of a contract management application. So without further ado, let's show you what this stuff looks like. I'll take over the screen share from Sunil, and I'm just going to walk you through a couple of typical use cases in the day in the life of a contract manager who's using Avenir. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and what you're looking at is a dashboard, a contract manager's homepage, right? And our philosophy here is that enabling your team to work smarter all starts with visibility. You have to have visibility into the things that you're working on, visibility into the agreements at large so you can identify bottlenecks, and visibility into the data in your agreement so you can quickly find areas where you're exposed to risk and take remediation efforts swiftly. Just identifying areas where you're exposed to risk can be so difficult if you don't have a firm grasp on the data inside of your contracts and the obligations that come along with those. So I can see my contracts here. I'm logged in as Lisa Gill. Lisa might be a legal representative at a hospital or healthcare institution. These are the contracts that she's currently working on right now. You can see there's 160 of them. Lisa is quite busy. Let's open up this provider agreement and take a look at what the contract actually looks like inside of our system. You'll notice that there is a workflow at the top. Each agreement goes through its own journey as we negotiate it to bring it to closure. This is a pretty standard review, approval, signature process. Of course, this can be tailored to meet the varying demands of all of our customers, but also to meet the varying demands of each individual type of contract that you're doing, right? An NDA, for instance, might be a much swifter workflow, get it out the door for signature. Don't even let it touch legal's desk, right? We want those to be self-service for the field. Whereas something like this might be going through a much more involved process where your risk team and your legal team and other parts of the organization are collaborating together to bring this contract to closure. In this case, this is a provider services agreement. And as we scroll across here, we can see the metadata about the contract. Metadata is such an important factor because this is what defines the agreement. And this is often the information that's coming from or being sent to all of the supporting infrastructure IT systems, right? Your claims system, your ERP, your vendor data, your procurement systems, right? All of those external platforms can be, again, a source or a recipient of the data in these agreements. In fact, it needs to be tied together for you to really maximize your contracts. If I come down here to the related items, I can see some of the things that are extremely relevant to the healthcare industry. For instance, this agreement is with an anesthesiologist, and I've got the fee schedule here right inside the contract as a related record. Now, this fee schedule, of course, is being managed as a metadata format. That means you can use this data for going and tracking against fair market values and benchmarking against the fees that are associated with this contract to make sure that you're maintaining compliance with all the regulatory requirements around fair market value when it comes to fees for your patients. Additionally, for this contract, we can see we have multiple participants, Ariel, MedScribe, and AccuSys, right? This is not unique to the healthcare industry, but it is quite common in the healthcare industry to have more than one participant in an agreement, right? Again, if you're a GPO or if you're a large institution who's contracting with a medical device manufacturer, and all of your subsidiary affiliations need to be able to procure from that manufacturer, right? This is a simple way to manage all of that data. What's really such a complex contract? Who do we have on this provider agreement? Who are all the participants? How do we manage that? We can really simplify that, right? By just simply adding a new participant. Maybe we'll give them a start date and an end date. Again, the idea here is to take a complex set of data, right? One contract with multiple participants, one participant having multiple contracts, and to simplify that and enable the people who are managing this information and managing these processes to quickly and swiftly move through. So you can see just with a couple of clicks, I'm able to add a new participant to this agreement. And now we can trigger downstream processes. Do we have a BAA in place with them? Do we have all of the other pieces of information that we need with this new participant? All of that can be triggered and managed right here in a centralized platform. I'm going to back out of this agreement and go back to my dashboard because I'm a contract manager. I'm going to go in through the processes of what I do every day, right? I can see on this this little widget down here in the middle, these are vendors that we're currently doing business with and have onboarded, but don't have business associates agreements in place with them, right? You can see MedScribe and SmartMD. So how do we quickly alleviate that? Well, we arm your team with the ability to quickly get a BAA drafted and get it out the door, right? And of course, you know, HIPAA compliance is more than just having a BAA. It goes into downstream procedures and really operational policies. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But in this case, we just need to get a MedScribe BAA drafted and in front of somebody at MedScribe ASAP so we can go ahead and continue doing business, right? Obviously, in the healthcare industry, this is step one before you do any contracting with any company. So we're just going to go ahead and create a quick contract with MedScribe and select the business associates agreement template and proceed. And again, this is all, you know, just helping manage these processes that come with their own degree of complexity in just a couple of clicks. So here we have the BAA MedScribe, and again, familiar screen, our business associates agreement template on the right, the data that we're tracking about this contract on the left. And notice the life cycle of this agreement, straight from draft to signature. This is an example of how two different types of contracts, the provider services agreement and the business associates agreement, can have their own unique workflows, their own unique sets of data associated with them. That way you can make sure you're tracking all the critical information for each type of contract. I'm going to go ahead and click save. This has now created a new contract number, put this into the draft stage. And now I can send this out for external review to my third party, right? So again, just taking something, initially arming you with the visibility. Who needs a BAA right now? Well, MedScribe is one of those companies. And then arming you with the tools to be able to quickly draft that agreement and get it out the door. So I'll just go ahead and finish this process off. And again, another just call out here is that we've actually connected your email composer right to the CLM application. No more downloading and uploading, no more attaching, no more managing a folder on your Windows Explorer or your Apple Finder app with a dozen contract drafts and versions in it. All of this is going to be centralized into a single repository that's armed with the visibility and the workflows to help you work more smartly and more efficiently. So now we can see we've got that contract out the door. Now let's think about a different example. Perhaps you need to send out a couple of BAAs to a few different organizations, right? You know, that was just a quick contract for MedScribe because we noticed they needed one. We also support what's called a mass contract event. Now, this is relevant in a lot of different areas. Sometimes you need to send out mass amendments. GDPR back in 2017 was a great example of this. Every contract you had with any organization that had any sort of affiliation with Europe had to have a GDPR clause or a DPA or something like that in the agreement. Every company in the world was kind of scrambling to get these in place, to amend all of their agreements with their providers so they can maintain compliance with GDPR. So in this case, we'll just create a new mass contract event called BAAs with new vendors. Select a recipient type. Is this a partner? Is this a company or what have you? And then select the contract type. Again, each one of these contracts, as we saw a moment ago, each one of these contract types is going to be a different template with a different workflow, etc. So now click Save and Next. And what we're doing here is just building out the framework of this agreement, which we're going to distribute in mass in just a couple of clicks. So BAA agreement with Avenir. If you've never typed with a webinar and 100 people watching, I suggest you give it a try. It's amazing how quickly you can throw typos out there. 3-year term, save and next. And now we're just going to select a couple of recipients for this agreement and send this thing out. Again, this is a process that might take somebody an hour. We're going to be able to shrink that down to just a couple of minutes in Focus and Creative Labs. They're going to get this agreement. And now we're off to the races. Again, this is going to kick off that contract workflow, which we just saw a moment ago. And this is going to go and start creating new contract records for each one of the participants, each one of the vendors that we selected, and sending them out for external review, all in just a couple of moments. And you can see we've now scheduled the event. As I go through this demonstration, we're going to see those contracts popping up in my contract list, indicating that they have been sent out. So let's go back to the homepage and let's think about another scenario, which Sunil mentioned, which is identifying areas where agreements might be impacted or where you might be exposed to some sort of risk, and you need to move swiftly to figure out where that exposure is, and then of course to move into next steps for mitigating that exposure and addressing it. So let's take the force majeure example. It's a classic example, especially in the last couple of years. So if I come into the contracts database here, this is just a list view of all the agreements that I've got in the system. Here's that BAA with MedScribe that I just sent out a moment ago. But this is unstructured. I need to get to a specific set of information here. I need to find all my contracts that have a force majeure clause in it. Specifically, I want to find my active MSAs that have a force majeure clause in it. So what we allow for is a simple query to be drafted here. So the contract model is the master services agreements, and the contract status is active, and the force majeure clause is included. Now I'm going to run this query, and that's going to pull back these 4 contracts where I have a vendor agreement in place, an MSA, and there is a force majeure clause present. This is good information, but perhaps what you really want to know is which of my vendors don't have a force majeure clause in their MSA. Very simple, just toggle that switch to false and run the report. And now I can see the 16 contracts here where I might actually be exposed to risk, right? With the global pandemic, a lot of organizations are having a hard time delivering, especially if there are physical goods that need to be delivered as a part of their agreement. These are the folks that you might expect to hear from based on everything undergoing with this pandemic. I tell you, if you don't have all of this data in single platform where you can query the data, then something just as seemingly simple as what I just demonstrated can be an absolute nightmare of a process. How do you do this if all of these contracts, thousands of them, are just sitting in a shared drive and you're managing the information in an Excel file or a Google Sheet? It becomes tremendously cumbersome, and this is information you need to have immediately. You need to have access to this information ASAP, because again, these are the places where you expect you might need to be renegotiating. You might need to be talking to your vendors. You might need to be making sure that you're not going to hurt yourself by carrying on with these contracts and not taking any remediation action. So we've gone through a couple of scenarios here, just in the general contract management world. The last thing I want to look at is obligations management. We've talked a lot about this today, and this is our platform for managing contractual obligations. And I want to unpack that concept just a little bit. Obligation management, what does it really mean? Well, you can think about a contract as a document full of obligations, the things that you have to do, the things that the third party you're dealing with has to do. And what we're actually doing is identifying those obligations. An example might be a quarterly reporting requirement or a monthly audit on a piece of IT infrastructure, right? These are obligations. But what we're doing further than that is taking an individual obligation and exploding that out into a series of what we call fulfillment tasks. So we're actually taking a contract document and turning it into a task management application. So you can assign these fulfillment tasks to people in the organization. Everybody pitches in on maintaining contract compliance, right? Procurement is updating the COI, and finance is submitting the quarterly reports, and your services team and your IT team are running the audits and things like this. So this is an enterprise-wide initiative, and we need enterprise-wide visibility and exposure here. I can now see all of the obligations that exist in my contracts I can see the categorization of these obligations, whether they're confidentiality obligations or delivery or audit. What's this information going to tell me? This is going to tell me what teams are carrying the heaviest load based on my contract load. And as you start to categorize more and more of a certain type of obligation, that might even impact things like staffing decisions, right? Do we have enough IT analysts on site to be able to manage all of these IT audits that we're doing, as an example? I can see all these categorizations down here in this nice pie chart. And I can also see the obligation tasks by status. Let's look at one of these tasks. These are all the things that need to happen and when they need to happen. You can see the due dates coming up, one coming up on the 3rd, one due tomorrow, which has already been fulfilled. And again, there are tons of these because every contract has got tons of them. And this is a systematic approach to maintaining compliance across everything. So let's jump into one of these delivery of documents obligations and just take a look at this at the task level. Again, a single contract term could very well, if this is a monthly audit on a 5-year contract, that's 60 individual tasks that need to occur. And what we're facilitating here is a task management system where the contract owner can communicate directly with the people responsible for fulfilling these tasks. And the person who is responsible for fulfilling this can come in and they can add notes and they can see what specifically the contract obligation is and what contract it's related to. They can attach documents and reports in the case of report submission. And most importantly, they can indicate that this is done. They can indicate that this task has been completed and fulfilled, and this is how we're going to help you maintain 100% compliance across all of your obligations. And, as Sunil mentioned earlier, these aren't just, simple actionable obligations. There are obligations that can be triggered by actions. Maintaining a clear view of all of this and understanding what you're on the hook for and when can be quite a process in itself. And this is really adept technology to help you manage all of that. So I am going to pull the slides back up, and I do thank everybody for the attention during the discussion so far. Let's go ahead and wrap up here. So first, just a little bit about us. Who is Avenir? We are a venture-backed software company. We're a ServiceNow partner. We have a global presence. We have customers across the world who are trusting us with the most important documents in their organization. Our goal, our mission as an organization is to stay innovative, to always be innovating new ways to approach the oldest problems that companies have, which is how do we stay on top of all these contracts? Contract management's got to be the oldest business process out there, and we're trying to stay on the cutting edge of how we can help enable you to manage it more effectively. In terms of next steps, give us a call. We're ready to give you an assessment, a free assessment, just to talk about where you're at today with your contract management maturity, how you're approaching obligations, how we can combine these efforts into a single process to really enable your entire organization to maintain compliance. And with that, I believe we are right at the quarter hour, maybe a little bit over. Thank you for sticking around, everybody. There's still a lot of people on the call. Maddie, over to you. Why don't we take some questions here in the last couple of minutes, if anybody has any?
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And yeah, we do have a question from one of the attendees. If you can just quickly look at it. It's a very good question.
Yeah.
The sell-side contracts. So I'll just hand it over to you, and yeah, if you can answer the question.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so the question is around, buy-side contract management is the easy part as we are mastering the templates of our procurement contracts. What about sell-side contracts, which are most of the time derived from our clients' templates and thus have multiple facets? So absolutely, we talked a lot about leveraging AI and NLP to extract obligations from agreements. Our AI technology, what it also does is it extracts clauses and all the language from third-party paper. So yes, if you have third-party paper coming from yeah, that is being dictated by the counterparty, then yes, absolutely, Avenir can handle that very effectively using AI. Yeah. Okay, Russell, maybe, okay, is your contract application available in French version? Okay,
I'll
looks like,
say, so we are built native on the ServiceNow platform, and are able to support any of the languages that ServiceNow can support. Of course, French is included in those, and the contract templates are your own templates, right? So they're going to naturally be in the language of record, but the ServiceNow platform itself is able to facilitate multiple languages. So the buttons and the screens and the headers and headings are all able to be configured to support French and any other language supported by the platform.
Great.
any other?
Yeah, so another question is from the integration point of view. So what is the integration flexibility your solution provides?
That's that's a really good one. We've talked a lot about dependent systems and contracts being the single source of truth that needs to talk to all dependent systems that we see, not only in this industry but across industries, right? So yes, we again, once again, we're built on the ServiceNow platform, and ServiceNow provides a robust integration framework in the form of an integration hub. It also provides spokes, i.e. specialized connectors to external systems, pre-built connectors to SAP, to Oracle, to CRMs like Salesforce, and so on. And it's pretty easy to configure, additional integrations to dependent systems.
Yeah, I think our perspective here is that the contract ought to be the source of truth for all of the data in the contract. And to really achieve that, you need to be able to connect that data to the corresponding systems, because data never lives in a vacuum. Processes never live in a vacuum. Beyond just having data delivered to and fro, we can deliver workflows into other systems, right? You sign a purchasing agreement. The next thing you need to do is issue a purchase order. Maybe that's happening in Oracle. All of these multi-step processes that are generally covered by different teams and different systems can be implemented and facilitated on our platform. It's fundamental to our approach and our value proposition that we can connect your contracts to the rest of your company.
Great. Thank you, Sunil. And so now the next question which I have is in terms of the effectiveness of AI. So what is the effectiveness of your AI technology to extract the contract clauses in life?
Yep, I can take that. Our again, our AI models, they get trained continuously, using thousands and thousands of agreements of all different types, and thousands of obligations on an ongoing basis. Our customers have reported greater than 99% accuracy in terms of extraction of clauses, as well as extraction of metadata from existing agreements,
Yeah.
paper agreements. Yeah.
Thank you. And
okay.
There
there was a question actually on that I saw cropped up, but it was around pricing. We'll definitely follow up, Daniel, on that separately. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Okay, and so we are already up, but I'll just take the last question. So this is related to obligation management, wherein there are many obligations which are not explicit, but dependent on something or some other factor like audit request or breach. So how can can your solution handle those types of obligations?
Yep, absolutely. Actually, we did talk about this. These in our mind are event-driven or non-actionable obligations, i.e., obligations that don't appear to be actionable when the agreement is signed, but become actionable at a later point in time. So yes, one, our extraction engine, our AI engine, can absolutely extract these, and then because we're built on the workflow platform, the best of breed workflow platform that exists out there, connecting triggering that obligation based on something else happening elsewhere in the system or in another dependent system, that is extremely easy to configure. So if there is a breach that occurs, or if there is for example, a ship notice that that a medical device manufacturer sends over to a hospital system, then there are certain obligations that can be triggered. For example, in the latter example, for the hospital system to make sure that there is good manufacturing practices have been followed, to inspect the quality, and so on and so forth. So those types of obligations can also be triggered based on something happening. And then yes, the example of the breach example that you listed out, there are countless types of event-driven obligations that Avenir can be configured to trigger and help you monitor.
And I believe I'll take this as the last question.
Okay,
So
one
this
more.
is for the implementation timeline. So what's the overall implementation cycle time, if one of us would like to start using or implementing the solution?
Yeah, so in terms of a phase one approach to get you off the ground, that can be implemented in as little as 6 weeks. Now, again, our approach, as we've discussed quite a bit today, is to make sure that we understand all the corresponding systems of record and have a clear path to deploying data and process workflows into those systems. So, those iterations take additional time down the line, but our customers are live in a couple of months generally, and leveraging and getting value out of the application very quickly. And whoever did ask that, I invite everybody, in fact, to reach out to us if you got more questions about this. I know we're nearing the top of the hour. Love to talk about how you're doing these things today, about where you sense improvements could be achieved, and questions about implementation or pricing or further questions about our approach. We're happy to talk about any of that.
Great. So thank you, Russell, and thank you, Sunil, for the wonderful session today. And I hope we helped you to understand the intricacies and the complexities in the healthcare and life sciences domain. So sorry we jumped a bit on the higher side for the time, but thank you again, and let's catch up soon. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, Sunil.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care.
Bye.